Hello everyone and welcome. This is Brenda Haug and I'll be one of the facilitators for today's session, Better Together, Tech Trainers Sharing Expertise, where we're getting people who are doing tech training in libraries in one form or another and talking about resources and ideas and ways to share them with one another. Before we get started, I'll cover a little bit of housekeeping, including how to use ReadyTalk, this tool that we're using today. All lines are muted, so the way that we interact with one another is using the chat. And I know a lot of you have found that already and have been sharing where you're at and what the weather is like, and that is great. We're expecting lots of interaction today, lots of sharing of resources and asking questions and sharing ideas. So go ahead and use the chat at any time. A couple of troubleshooting things. If you lose your internet connection and the screen freezes or you get not kicked out or something happens, the best way to troubleshoot that is just to go back into your email and the link that you received to today's session, just follow that and come into the session again. I know a lot of you are connecting with us using just voice over IP, so audio coming through your speakers or headphone on your computer. If you are on the phone and you lose that phone connection, again, same thing, just redial the phone number and that will almost always take care of things. Today's session is being recorded and we'll have a link to the recording available on the TechSoup website, and we have previous webinars there too. Today's webinar is a part of a series of webinars that are based on the EDGE benchmarks, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. One important note on this slide is that you'll receive a link. So later today you'll get an email and you'll get a link to the recording of today's session. You'll get a copy of the PowerPoint. I actually sent out an email an hour before we started that had a reminder about the session, and it also included the PowerPoint slides. So if for any reason it would be easier for you to follow along that way, just know that you have those slides and then we'll send those again. And then another important thing that we'll include in that message later, that we send later, is links. So we're going to talk about a lot of resources today. Don't feel like you need to be writing down all of the web addresses because we'll be sending you a follow-up message that has all of those in it. And if you're on Twitter, the hashtag for today is just TechSoup. Okay, well I think that's it for housekeeping. So again, today we're here, Better Together, Tech Trainers Sharing Expertise, and just an opportunity for tech trainers to talk about some of the resources that are useful, ways to connect with one another, and then just ways to learn and think more about training. Joining me today in presenting is Stephanie Girding. Stephanie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Brenda. Yes, I'm Stephanie, and I'm joining from Seattle, Washington, where I work as an independent library consultant. And I do a lot of training around sort of trainer topics and digital literacy and grants and advocacy. And I'm really glad to be able to present with Brenda. We've been doing training together for a long time. I think the first time probably over 12 years ago or so.
Yep. And Stephanie actually wrote a book, The Accidental Technology Trainer, so this is definitely a topic she has thought a lot about. And then we also have Sarah Washburn with us, and she is in the chat, and she's been greeting a lot of you. And so feel free to, again, use that chat throughout the session to just share ideas, share comments, share resources, share questions. And the questions that you ask, we'll be paying attention to those and we'll answer them throughout the session, and then we have a time at the end when we'll answer the ones we haven't gotten to throughout the session. So feel free to ask them at any time. We'll look forward to those. So today what we're going to cover, talk about TechSoup and TechSoup for libraries and those EDGE benchmarks that I mentioned. And then the content for today is really tech trainers sharing expertise. How do we do that? With lots of time for questions and answers from all of you. So TechSoup, I'm guessing that some of you are familiar with TechSoup already and some of you may not be. TechSoup is a nonprofit, and one of the ways that people are often familiar with it is because of the technology donation program. And with partnerships with Microsoft, Adobe, Cisco, and Symantec. It's a way for nonprofits and libraries to get some really great deals on technology. So we'll include that in the resources that we send out after. We'll include a link to TechSoup. And then there is TechSoup for Libraries, which is a portion of TechSoup that is really specifically focused on libraries and technology being used in libraries. And we'll send out a link that takes you right to that section of TechSoup too. And I mentioned that today's webinar is part of a series of webinars that we've been doing around the EDGE benchmarks. The EDGE initiative is a coalition. It includes a bunch of leading library and government organizations, including TechSoup and WebJunction and the Public Library Association and some state libraries and more. And they're all working together and getting lots of feedback and input from the library community to develop benchmarks that can help libraries really take a look at their public technology services. And this webinar that we're in today, the benchmark states, libraries support continuous improvement in public access technology by sharing expertise and best practices with others, locally, regionally, and nationally. So today is all about thinking about sharing resources with one another. So with that, I think we're ready to dive into our content for today. And Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you for a minute.
Right. So we have a little bit of a theme today for our webinar. And this really came about thinking about the book Stone Soup. So some of you might be familiar with it. But basically it's a story that took place in post-war Eastern Europe when there was a great famine. And people were sort of hoarding whatever food that they could find and hiding it from friends and neighbors. And one day a soldier came into a village and started asking questions, and people kind of said, you know, there's no food here, just keep moving on. And he said, well, I have everything I need, and actually I was going to make soup that I was going to share with all of you. And so he pulled out a big iron cauldron and he filled it up with water and built a fire. And then with great ceremony he pulled out of a velvet bag a big sort of ordinary looking stone and dropped it in. And people started kind of gathering around, and he said, this soup's going to be really great, but you know, it's even better with cabbage. And so somebody volunteered some cabbage, and you know, then little by little everybody was sort of adding to it. And so then ended up being a wonderful soup that was shared with the whole community. So definitely a great moral about how when we work together with everybody contributing what we can, there's really a greater good that's achieved. And this book always reminds me sort of TechSoup because of how it was founded. And it was founded in '87 by Daniel Ben Horan. And this was kind of his thinking too, that nonprofits could really be helped by technology, but they didn't really have all the resources. And that he knew of tech people who did have time and expertise that they wanted to donate. So his goal was really trying to bring everybody together and share and find out what would happen. And I think along with this webinar, it's sort of the same thinking that, you know, there's that saying, none of us is as smart as all of us. So I think we can do the same thing as library technology trainers, is really sharing what we know and sharing our resources together to come up with our own sort of stone soup. So we're going to be carrying this theme forward as we talk today. And Brenda, you can go ahead and introduce our topics.
Okay. Well, first of all, we wanted to, again, we're hoping that people will share a lot during today, and so we wanted to ask you a couple of questions just to find out what you're interested in and kind of your experience with training too. So here's a question for you. Some things that we plan on covering today: sources for training materials, tips on delivering training, and then ways to connect with other people who are doing training. If you had to pick one of those three that you were most interested in, which one would you pick? I'll give you a couple of minutes to weigh in on that. And again, we're planning to cover all of them, but this will help us know how much time to spend on each of those different sections. So if you had to pick one, which one would you Which one is most important or most interesting to you? Okay, give it just maybe 5 more seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'll show the results. So it looks like a lot of you are interested in sources for training materials, and we have a lot of those. And a lot of you are looking for just tips on delivering training, and we have a lot on that. And then we've got a few ways to connect with other trainers that we'll talk about too. So that's a good match to what we had planned. Thanks for doing that. We've got one more poll, and this one is asking what percentage of your time is spent on training. And some of you, this may be an easy question because you spend a lot of it or a little, but just guesstimate how much of your time right now is spent on training, both planning the training and then actually delivering training.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting question because I know in libraries and nonprofits we're all wearing a lot of different hats. So it's interesting to think about that. May not primarily just be working on training.
Yeah. And I think, formal and informal. So when people are just asking a question, you're helping them at a computer. That's training too. So just Okay, well let's take a look at this one. So we do have some people who are training is really a lot of what their job is. And then a lot of people where it's a really significant percentage of what you do in your job. So that's good to know. Again, we hope for lots of interaction, and we're going to share a lot of our favorite resources. As Stephanie said, we've been doing tech training for a long time, and so we'll share a lot of our favorite resources, but I am constantly getting introduced to new things that I didn't know existed, or finding out about things that are happening in another part of the country that I wasn't aware of and that are really great. So I hope there'll be lots of sharing. And again, use the chat throughout the session to do that. Oops. Okay, so our topics today, we're going to talk about all 3 of those things: finding good training material, info on how to be a trainer, and then connecting with other people who are interested in training too. And the first one we'll talk about is where can you find good training materials. And we're going to include both patron training and staff training, good resources that we're aware of that can be really useful if you're working on these things.
Yeah, so starting with our stone soup, starting with our empty bowl and our stone, let's start adding to that. And I think that the great thing as far as resources and finding good training materials is that just in the last even couple of years, I've really noticed that there's so much more that's available online that you can find. And I can just remember even 5 years ago that there just wasn't this kind of sharing going on. So I really do feel like there's a lot of great resources. So just like it seems like it's a lot easier to get good fresh vegetables that we can add to our soup, the same sort of thing applies with finding training resources as well. So let's get started sharing some of those.
And the first one we'll talk about is WebJunction, which as Stephanie and I were brainstorming the resources we would talk about, this one's, and of course, this is a biggie. I think we maybe even have some people on from WebJunction on the session today. But WebJunction has been around since 2003, and it just has all sorts of resources for creating and delivering training, both for staff, so staff training and patron training. And there's information on instructional design, information on training strategies. There are examples of training, so you can find lesson plans, you can find handouts. They do lots of webinars too, and some of them are related to training and technology. So I see Kathleen from WebJunction is on, and she has said hi to everyone. So if you haven't heard of WebJunction and you are a trainer or you're involved with training, this is a biggie. This is the first one to go check out because there's just so much good stuff that has been shared there.
Yeah, and they also have great forums too that you can use to ask questions. So if there's something that you can't find, that can be a good place to ask and have other people answer you that maybe have a resource available even if it's not on there yet. Okay, and definitely share in the chat as we go along if you've used any of these resources, and share how you've used them, because sometimes maybe you're using them in a way that we don't know about, and we're happy to pass that all on to you as well. This is another resource you can share in the chat if you've used it, but it was developed by Microsoft, and it's all free, and there's all kinds of information available. You do have to log on to join it, and I know at TechSoup we did a webinar with Microsoft when they were launching this series. But it's really nice because it's all designed for adult learners, and they do have different series that are available. So 1 hour getting started workshop, and they do gear things really towards nonprofits and libraries, which is really nice as well. And you can see that there's longer versions that are also available, like 3-hour series. And you do get the PowerPoints that you can customize, handouts, even flyers for advertising, the workshops as well that are all customizable. So sort of a nice go-to resource that you can sort of make your own as well.
So some of the resources we're going to talk about are resources that are great for you as a trainer to go and get ideas or to use a handout or something. And then some of them are ones that would be good ones to point patrons to as well. So if someone wanted to do some self-directed learning, or there was a topic they were interested in that you weren't able to provide training on, or so we'll kind of try to differentiate those things as we go. Info people, someone mentioned that in the chat, Info people. This has been one of my favorites for a long time. It's in California, and I think originally served libraries in California, but its reach has really gotten a lot bigger than that. And we're going to talk about